Sunday, February 18th, 2001. Foxstone Park, Vienna, Virginia. A 56-year-old man kneels in the wet grass beneath a wooden footbridge. He is a devout Catholic. He has 6 children. His wife believes he is at evening mass, and he is taping a black plastic bag containing the names, addresses, and operational identities of every American intelligence asset working inside Russia to the underside of a bridge in a public park, so that a man from the SVR can collect it 45 minutes later. He stands, brushes the dirt from his coat, walks back toward his car. A black van screeches to a halt in front of him. The side door is already open before it stops moving. 4 armed men leap out. He does not run. He does not reach for the gun in his coat pocket. He does not lie. He smiles. A small, tired, almost grateful smile. And he speaks 4 words that will haunt the FBI for the next 25 years. His name was Robert Hanssen. For 22 years, he was one of the FBI's most senior counterintelligence officers. The man whose job was to identify Russian spies inside the United States government. And for 22 years, every single one of them, he had also been a Russian spy. To understand the damage Robert Hanssen caused, you have to understand what the FBI had built and exactly where they had placed him. By the late 1970s, the FBI's counterintelligence division was waging a quiet, merciless war against Soviet espionage on American soil. Their target list was specific. Every Russian intelligence officer working under diplomatic cover at the Soviet embassy. Their job was to identify them, surveil them, and, when possible, turn them. To do that work, the Bureau needed officers fluent in Russian, trained in Soviet methodology, and cleared to access the most sensitive files in the building. Robert Hanssen was all 3. He had been recruited in 1976, a Northwestern University graduate with a degree in chemistry, a master's in accounting, and a working knowledge of Russian. By 1979, 3 years in, he was assigned to New York. The job? Building counterintelligence dossiers on Soviet personnel. But here is what the Bureau did not know about the agent it had just trusted with its most sensitive Soviet files. Less than 3 months after taking that assignment, Robert Hanssen wrote his first letter to Soviet military intelligence. To understand why, you have to go back 20 years earlier, to Chicago, to a small house in Norwood Park. Howard Hanssen was a Chicago police officer who beat his only son. Not occasionally, habitually. Friends and later psychiatrists would describe a man who told his son repeatedly that he was worthless, that he would never amount to anything, that he was, in the father's preferred phrase, a loser. Robert Hanssen, by every account of his classmates and his Bureau colleagues, spent the rest of his life trying to prove his father wrong. He converted to Catholicism after marrying his wife, Bonnie. He joined Opus Dei, the strict traditionalist Catholic organization that demanded daily mass, confession, and personal sacrifice. He had 6 children. He attended church without fail. To his neighbors in Vienna, Virginia, he was the quiet family man down the street. But this is the part of the file the public has never quite reconciled. Because at the same time he was attending daily mass, Robert Hanssen was secretly recording his wife in their bedroom and showing the footage to a male friend through a closed-circuit camera he had installed for that purpose. He gave the same friend a stripper named Priscilla Gailey, whom he flew to Hong Kong on Soviet money. He carried a Browning high-power pistol everywhere he went, to church, to dinner, to confession. There were two Robert Hanssens, and the man who knelt in the pew on Sunday morning was not the man who, on Sunday afternoon, walked into a public park to betray his country. What no one in the FBI understood until the Inspector General report of 2003 was that the second Hanssen had been operating inside the first one for 22 years. And nobody, not his colleagues, not his confessor, not his wife, had any idea. The first letter was short. 3 pages, typed on a personal typewriter, mailed to a known GRU officer in New York. It contained the name of an FBI source inside the Soviet embassy. In return, Hanssen received $20,000 in cash and a code name. The Soviets, who would handle him for the next 2 decades, called him Ramon Garcia, later simply B. They never learned his real name, not for 16 years. Investigators would later identify 4 distinct motives behind what Hanssen did. None of them, on its own, explains the scale of what followed. The first was money. He had a wife and 6 children on a federal salary. He owed $30,000 in 1979. The first payment cleared his debt and bought him a new car. The second was professional resentment. Hanssen was, by his own colleagues' admission, brilliant. A Russian-speaking computer expert in an institution that did not yet understand what computers were. But the Bureau passed him over. They sent him to bureaucratic backwaters. They promoted men he considered intellectually inferior. By his 8th year of service, he had begun referring to the FBI in private letters to his Soviet handlers as the Gulag. The third was deeper. Psychiatrists who studied Hanssen for over 100 hours after his capture concluded that he had spent his life desperate to prove that he was the smartest man in any room he entered, and that the espionage was, more than anything else, an intellectual exercise. A way to prove that he could outthink the entire United States government. The KGB existed, in his mind, less as an enemy and more as the only institution capable of recognizing his genius. The fourth was the FBI itself. Because the truth that the Inspector General would eventually publish was this: Robert Hanssen left a trail a child could have followed. The drinking buddies who knew about the stripper, the cousins who saw the cash, the colleagues who watched him search files he had no clearance to access, the internal security failures so basic that when listed, they look almost fictional. In total, the Bureau missed 9 separate documented opportunities to catch Robert Hanssen. We will get to all of them. Between 1985 and 2001, Hanssen passed his Soviet handlers more than 6,000 pages of classified material. Among them, the location of a top-secret American eavesdropping tunnel constructed under the Soviet embassy in Washington. $300 million of intelligence gone in a single document. Continuity of government plans for what the United States would do if Washington fell to nuclear attack. The complete identities of every double agent the FBI had recruited inside Soviet intelligence. 3 of those agents were executed. And here is a detail that will matter at the end of this file. The KGB officer Hanssen mailed his secrets to the man who ran his case from the Soviet embassy in Washington was named Viktor Cherkashin. The same Viktor Cherkashin who 6 months earlier had recruited a CIA officer named Aldrich Ames. 2 American intelligence officers, 2 betrayals, 1 Russian handler. The KGB had penetrated the heart of both the FBI and the CIA through the same man. But neither agency knew the other had been breached. And for 16 years, neither could explain why their best Russian assets kept dying. In 1998, The FBI and CIA, working jointly, finally identified what they believed was the source of the leaks. His name was Brian Kelly. He was a senior CIA counterintelligence officer. He was a decorated 25-year veteran of American intelligence. He spoke Russian. He had access. He fit the profile. He was completely innocent. For 2 years, the FBI surveilled Brian Kelly around the clock. They wiretapped his phone. They placed informants in his life. They interrogated his family, including his elderly mother, about his loyalties. They confronted him directly and accused him to his face of being a Russian spy. They told his colleagues he was under investigation, ending his career in everything but name. And while all of this was happening, the real spy walked past Brian Kelly's empty office every day on his way to lunch. Robert Hanssen was at the time an FBI counterintelligence officer assigned to the Joint Task Force investigating Brian Kelly. He was helping build the case against the wrong man. What broke the case open was not surveillance. It was a transaction. In November of 2000, a former Russian intelligence officer offered to sell the FBI a file. He told them, through intermediaries, that the file contained the identity of a high-level mole inside American intelligence. He named his price: $7 million. And political asylum. The FBI paid. They flew the source out of Russia. They gave him a new identity, and on a December afternoon in 2000, in a safe house outside Washington, they opened the file. What was inside was not Brian Kelly. It was a fingerprint, lifted by the KGB from a single trash bag dropped at a 1989 dead site. It was a tape recording of an unidentified male voice, made during a phone call from a payphone in 1986. And it was a partial code name, Ramon Garcia, that no one in the Bureau had ever heard before. The fingerprint, once it was run through FBI personnel records, belonged to a senior counterintelligence officer named Robert Hanssen. What followed was one of the most precise espionage takedowns in American history. The FBI, terrified that Hanssen would flee or destroy evidence, designed a trap with a single moving part. They created a new FBI position they didn't actually need, head of a fake new computer security division, and offered it to Hanssen as a promotion. They assigned him a young investigative specialist named Eric O'Neill, ostensibly as his assistant. O'Neill's actual job was to watch every keystroke Hanssen made. On January 13, 2001, Hanssen moved into his new office. He did not know that every drawer had been searched. Every file had been cataloged. The Palm Pilot in his briefcase, which he carried everywhere, had already been secretly accessed and copied while he was in the bathroom on his second day. On the Palm Pilot, the FBI found everything. The dates of the next 3 planned dead drops, the locations, the signal sites where he marked chalk lines on mailboxes to indicate a delivery was ready. The exact phrase he would use to confirm receipt. They knew the next drop was scheduled for Sunday, February 18th. They knew the location, a wooden footbridge in a small public park near his home. They knew the signal, a piece of white tape on a parking sign at the entrance to the park. All they had to do was let him do it one more time. That afternoon, Robert Hanssen kissed his wife goodbye and told her he was running an errand. He drove 3 miles. He parked his Ford Taurus on Creek Crossing Road. He walked into Foxstone Park alone. In his coat pocket, he carried a Browning high-power pistol. In a black plastic bag, he carried 15 pages of top-secret cable traffic, communications between American intelligence officers in Moscow, written that week. He had stolen them 3 days earlier. He believed they would be worth at least $50,000 at the next drop. What he did not know was that the FBI had already replaced his usual handler at the Russian embassy with surveillance teams. There would be no payment. There was no Soviet officer waiting. He knelt in the wet grass. He taped the bag to the underside of the bridge. He stood. He walked back toward his car. 4 armed men leaped out. Hanssen did not run. He did not reach for the pistol in his pocket. He looked at them, and the smile on his face is one of the things every officer present that day in their later sworn statements would describe in exactly the same way. He looked relieved. "What took you so long?" Psychiatrists who interviewed him after the arrest reached a conclusion that the Bureau, to this day, cannot fully accept. Robert Hanssen had been waiting to be caught for years, possibly for over a decade. The signal he was looking for in every meeting with his handlers was not betrayal. It was the moment when the institution he had outsmarted for 22 years would finally notice him. When the 4 men in the van said the words, "FBI, you are under arrest," Robert Hanssen heard something else. He heard, at last, "We see you." On July 6, 2001, Robert Hanssen pleaded guilty to 15 counts of espionage. To avoid the death penalty, he agreed to a debriefing process the FBI later described as the most exhaustive insider threat interview ever conducted. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms with no possibility of parole. He was sent to ADX Florence, the federal supermax in Colorado. He spent 23 hours a day alone in a concrete cell, with 1 hour for exercise in a yard the size of a parking space. He was permitted no contact with other inmates. He read the Catholic Mass every morning, alone. He never spoke with his wife in person again. On the morning of June 5, 2023, a guard found him on the floor of his cell. He had been dead for several hours. Natural causes. He was 79 years old. His arrest cost the United States $7 million. The damage he caused, between executed assets, compromised operations, and intelligence rebuilding programs, has been estimated by Senate investigators at several billion. 5 months ago, on January 5, 2026, another American spy died in federal prison. Aldrich Ames, the CIA mole whom Victor Chakoshin had also handled in the same city during the same years. The man whose betrayal the FBI had spent 6 years investigating, never realizing that the agent investigating him was the second one. 2 men, 2 betrayals. 1 Russian who handled them both. Ames is gone. Chakoshin died in 2023. Hanssen is gone. But the question that hangs over their files, the one the FBI's own Inspector General could not answer, is the only one that matters. Robert Hanssen left a trail a competent analyst could have followed by 1985. 9 times. 9. The institution looked at him and looked away. So before you close this file, ask yourself the question Hanssen's psychiatrists believe he was asking himself for the last decade of his career. If you could outsmart the system for 22 years, what would you be waiting for? The next file in this archive opens in a Manhattan office tower in 1997. The man who built the largest financial fraud in American history is sitting at a polished desk, signing the year-end statements of his most loyal clients. Every number on every page is a lie. He will keep lying. To investors, to regulators, to his own family. For another 11 years. If Hanssen sold his country for 22 years, the next man on this file sold his investors for 40.